Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video we will be looking at Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalization, which you need to know for AQA ALEVEL psychology in the subtopic of attachment. I hope you enjoy this video and find it helpful. Let's get started. Institutionalization refers to the process by which individuals are placed in institutions, such as psychiatric hospitals, orphanages, or correctional facilities, often for long periods. This can occur due to various reasons, including mental health issues, lack of family support, or legal circumstances. The term can also describe the impact of living in such environments on individuals, which may include dependency on the institution, changes in behavior, and difficulties in reintegrating into society after leaving. Rutter et al., 1998. Former President Nicolae Ceausescu required Romanian women to have 5 children. Many Romanian parents could not afford to keep their children, and the children ended up in huge orphanages in very poor conditions. After the 1989 Romanian Revolution, many of the children were adopted, some by British parents. Rutter et al., 1998, aimed to investigate whether early institutionalization had long-term effects on children's emotional and social development and whether these effects could be overcome with love and care. Michael Rutter and Edmund Sonjugabach, 1998, conducted a longitudinal study and observed the effects of institutional care and privation. They followed a group of 165 Romanian orphans previously been placed in orphanages, aged 1 to 2 weeks old, with minimal adult contact, who were then adopted by UK families as part of the English and Romanian Adoptee (ERA) study. There were 3 conditions in the study: 58 were adopted before the age of 6 months, 59 were adopted between the ages of 6 months and 2 years, 54 were adopted between the ages 2 years and 4 years old. The institutionalized orphans were raised naturally by the loving families who adopted them. Their physical, cognitive, social and emotional development was assessed at ages 4, 6, 11, 15 and 22 to 25 years using standardized testing, interview and observation techniques. They were compared to a control group of 52 British children who were adopted before the age of 6 months within the UK. At the time of adoption, 50% of the adoptees showed signs of delayed intellectual development and were severely malnourished and physically smaller. The control group did not display these deficits. At age 11, the mean IQ of those adopted before the age of 6 months was 102, for those adopted between 6 months and 2 years it was 86, and for this adopted after 2 years it was 77. With those who had been adopted before the age of 6 months catching up with their British counterparts. The variation in the extent to which children recovered from the effects of institutionalization correlated to the age at which they had been adopted. 74% of infants adopted after the age of 6 months showed signs of disinhibited attachment and delayed social problems with peer relationships. 9% of infants adopted before the age of 6 months showed signs of disinhibited attachment. The negative effects of institutionalization could be overcome by sensitive loving and nurturing care. Separation from carers alone will not cause developmental problems, as the British children who were separated did not display developmental problems. Disinhibited attachment, Rutter, 2006, has explained this as an adaptation to living with multiple caregivers during the sensitive period of attachment formation as a result of poor quality institutional care. Rutter, 2001, conducted a follow-up study and found that problems in attachment, hyperactivity and cognitive impairment could be linked to institutionalization. This was most apparent on children who endured long periods of institutional care, although about 20% showed normal functioning. Other apparent problems such as emotional problems, peer relationship problems and behavioral problems were concluded not to be linked to institutionalization. This suggested that specific effects are related to long-term institutional care and only within certain types of people. Therefore, individual differences in children also appear to play a role too in mitigating for developmental problems. Zeanah et al., 2005. Zeanah et al., 2005, aimed to investigate whether early relationships with caregivers affect children's emotional and behavioral outcomes, particularly in the context of attachment theory. They conducted the Bucharest Early Intervention (BEL) project, assessing the attachment in 95 Romanian children aged 12 to 31 months who had spent an average of 90% of their lives in institutional care. Their attachment type was measured using the strange situation. They were then compared to a control group of 50 children who had never lived in an institution. In addition, carers were asked about unusual social behavior, including clingy, attention-seeking behavior directed inappropriately at all adults, a measure of disinhibited attachment. They found that in the institutionalized group 19% were classified as securely attached and 44% were classified as having a disinhibited attachment, compared to the control group where 74% were classified as securely attached and 19% were classified as having a disinhibited attachment. They concluded that institutionalization led to lower levels of secure attachment and higher levels of disinhibited attachment. Therefore, institutionalization has a negative effect on attachment. Effects of institutionalization. Disinhibited attachment is when infants do not know what counts as appropriate behavior towards strangers and are equally as friendly and affectionate towards everyone. Characterized by attention-seeking and social behavior directed indiscriminately towards all adults, lack of fear of strangers, clinginess, inappropriate physical contact, lack of checking back to the parent in stressful situations. Delayed intellectual development, mental retardation, low IQ, is a significant lack of cognitive functioning compared to peers, which can manifest as difficulties in learning, reasoning, problem-solving, concentration, and communication skills. An infant may struggle to meet developmental milestones, such as language acquisition, academic performance, and social interactions, and may require specialized support and interventions to help them reach their full potential. Children can catch up by 4 years old, if infants are adopted before the age of 6 months. Impaired language skills. Where an infant has difficulty communicating effectively and struggles to interact with others. An infant may struggle with their understanding, learning, and use of language, which can manifest as limited vocabulary, difficulty forming sentences, or trouble following conversations. Impaired social skills, where an infant has difficulty interpreting social cues, understanding emotions, and engaging in reciprocal interactions. Delayed physical development. Characterized by slower progression in achieving physical milestones compared to peers, which can include delays in growth, motor skills, and overall physical health. This condition can manifest as difficulties in coordination, balance, and strength, affecting a child's ability to perform everyday activities such as walking, running, or fine motor tasks like writing. An infant may require specialized support, including physical therapy, to help them catch up with their peers and enhance their overall physical capabilities. Delayed psychological development, characterized by a lack of emotional and cognitive growth compared to peers, which can affect a child's ability to understand and manage emotions, develop self-regulation, and engage in social relationships. This delay can manifest as difficulties in forming attachments, understanding social cues, and coping with stress or challenges. An infant may require psychological support, counseling, and interventions aimed at fostering emotional intelligence and resilience. A lack of internal working model, which is the absence of a mental framework that helps individuals understand and predict their relationships and interactions with others. An infant may struggle with trust, emotional regulation, and forming secure attachments. This can lead to difficulties in social interactions and relationships throughout life. An infant may require therapeutic support to process past experiences and build healthier relational patterns. Quasi-autism is a set of behaviors and characteristics that resemble those of autism spectrum disorder, ASD, but do not fully meet the diagnostic criteria for autism. An infant may exhibit challenges in social interaction, communication, and repetitive behaviors, but these traits might be less pronounced or vary in intensity compared to those with a formal autism diagnosis. Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalization have several strengths and limitations. A strength of research into Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalization is that it has high ecological validity. There is a large breadth of Romanian orphan research, all of which has drawn similar conclusions. Gardner, 1972, found a lack of emotional care may lead to deprivation, dwarfism, and physical underdevelopment. Other studies have found cognitive development may be negatively affected by emotional deprivation as well as disinhibited attachments. Quinton et al., 1984, found women who had been raised in institutional care tended to be poorer parents themselves and report extreme difficulty in parenthood when compared to a control group reared within the family setting. Lemaire and Audet, 2006, examined the impact of early institutional care on children's attachment and emotional development. Their study focused on 36 orphan children who had been raised in institutions, later placed in foster care and adopted by Canadian families. The psychologists measured their physical health and growth. They found that at the age of 4, they were found to be physically smaller than a control group of children. This difference disappeared by the age of 10, however, and their physical health also improved in line with the control group. This highlighted how recovery from institutional care was possible for physical development. This is a strength because it suggests that early intervention and nurturing environments can significantly mitigate the adverse effects of institutionalization. The consistency of findings across various studies supports the idea that while emotional deprivation can lead to serious developmental challenges, recovery is possible when children receive appropriate care. A strength of research into Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalization is that it has led to the development of positive and supportive environments and interventions to help reverse the effects of institutionalization. Research has shown that the effects of institutionalization can be overcome with adequate substitute care. Hodges and Tizard, 1989, conducted a longitudinal natural experiment using 65 children who had been placed into institutional care before the age of 4 months, where there was a no-attachment policy. By 4 years, 24 had been adopted, 15 returned home and the remaining 26 were still in institutions. Assessments were taken at ages 8 and 16. Data was obtained through interviews with the adolescents and their mothers, and sometimes fathers. A self-report questionnaire on social difficulties was completed by adolescents and finally, teachers completed a postal questionnaire, focusing on the adolescents' relationships with teachers and peers. They found that maternal deprivation was often overcome by adopted children, with the children going on to develop strong and long-lasting attachments with their parents once placed in families, whereas the institutionalized groups made little recovery. This is a strength because it suggests that with the right environment and care, children who have experienced early institutionalization can develop healthy attachments and emotional resilience. The findings from Hodges and Tizard's study indicate that adoption can provide the necessary support for overcoming early maternal deprivation, leading to positive developmental outcomes. This reinforces the idea that interventions and supportive relationships are crucial for recovery and growth in children who have faced such challenges. A strength of research into Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalization is that the research is longitudinal. The studies were able to show the long-term effects of institutionalization. This helped measure the lives of children over many years to truly understand the lasting differences that occurred in orphans. These studies have developmental insights, as they allow researchers to observe changes and continuities in behaviors, attitudes, or characteristics over time, providing a deeper understanding of developmental processes. Furthermore, by tracking the same individuals over time, longitudinal studies can help establish causal relationships between variables, as they can show how earlier experiences influence later outcomes. On top of this, these studies often gather extensive data, which can lead to more nuanced insights and a comprehensive view of the subject matter being studied. This is a strength because it suggests that the long-term effects of institutionalization can be effectively measured, providing crucial insights into how early experiences shape development. The ability to track individuals over time enhances the reliability of the findings, making it easier to draw meaningful conclusions about the developmental trajectories of these children. A strength of research into Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalization is that it has practical and real-world applications. Research into Romanian orphans has enhanced psychologists' knowledge of the negative effects of institutionalization. Langton, 2006, suggested that research has led to improvements in the way children are cared for within institutions. Prior to such studies into how institutional care affected development, carers were discouraged from forming any attachment or close bonds, and children often had large numbers of staff to take care of them, none of which they formed any type of bond with. As time has gone on, it is now understood just how important an emotional connection between a caregiver and child is for their physical and mental growth. Children's homes now avoid having large numbers of caregivers for each child. They now have one or two key workers who play a central role in the child's bringing and development whilst they are there. Furthermore, in the past, mothers giving up their babies for adoption were encouraged to nurse their children for a significant period of time. By the time the child was adopted, their sensitive period to form an attachment had passed, which affected their ability to form secure attachments with their new caregivers. Adoption practices have since changed on the back of institutional care studies with babies adopted within the first week of birth. Considerable efforts are made to accommodate children into foster care or have them adopted instead as soon as possible. This is a strength because it suggests that the insights gained from research into Romanian orphan studies can lead to meaningful changes in child care practices, ultimately improving the developmental outcomes for children in institutional settings. By recognizing the importance of forming secure attachments, caregivers can create more nurturing environments that support children's emotional and psychological growth. This demonstrates how psychological research can have a direct impact on real-world practices, benefiting vulnerable populations. A limitation of research into Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalization is that it lacks data on adult development. The latest data from the ERA study looked at the children in their early to mid-20s. This means that do not currently have data to answer some of the most interesting questions about the long-term effects of early institutional care. These research questions include the lifetime prevalence of mental health problems and participants' success in forming and maintaining adult romantic relationships. It will take a long time to gather this data because of the longitudinal design of the study, e.g., the same participants are followed over a long period of time. This is a limitation because it suggests that the current findings from the Romanian orphan studies may not fully capture the long-term impacts of early institutionalization on individuals as they transition into adulthood. Without data on adult development, we cannot adequately assess how early experiences in institutions influence mental health outcomes or the ability to form and maintain meaningful relationships later in life. This gap in research limits our understanding of the lasting effects of institutional care and highlights the need for ongoing studies that follow participants into later stages of life. A limitation of research into Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalization is that it is socially sensitive. The results show that late adopted children typically have poor developmental outcomes. Results have been published while the children have been growing up, meaning that their parents, teachers, and anyone else who knew them might have lowered their expectations and treated the adopted children differently. This might even have created a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is a limitation because it suggests that the publication of research findings may inadvertently impact the treatment of late adopted children, leading to lowered expectations from caregivers and educators. Such a shift in perception can hinder the children's development and reinforce negative outcomes, creating a cycle where the children internalize these lower expectations. This highlights the ethical considerations that researchers must navigate when disseminating sensitive findings that could affect the lives of vulnerable populations. A limitation of research into Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalization is that it suffers from cultural bias. Romanian orphans were in a country with poorer education system, healthcare, and a collapsed governmental regime in 1989. This could be argued to be the main contributing factor for under-resourced institutions having children who struggle physically and mentally, not institutionalization itself, when compared to Western institutions which have greater resources for their orphans. This is a limitation because it suggests that the findings from the Romanian orphan studies may not be universally applicable, as they are heavily influenced by the specific socio-economic and cultural conditions of Romania at that time. It raises the concern that the negative developmental outcomes observed in these studies could be attributed more to the systemic issues within the Romanian context rather than the inherent effects of institutionalization itself. This highlights the need for a more nuanced understanding of how cultural and environmental factors can shape the experiences and outcomes of children in institutional care. A limitation of research into Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalization is that it lacks control over extraneous variables. Early studies of institutionalization were poorly controlled. The studies were often longitudinal and therefore, the Romanian orphans may actually display poor development, not due to institutionalization but other factors such as poor cognitive stimulation in care or training by staff. This is a limitation because it suggests that the negative developmental outcomes observed in the Romanian orphans may be confounded by other extraneous variables, making it difficult to isolate the specific effects of institutionalization. Without controlling for these factors, researchers cannot definitively conclude that institutionalization is the primary cause of the children's struggles. This undermines the validity of the findings and raises questions about the generalizability of the results to other contexts. A limitation of research into Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalization is that the results may be affected by individual differences. Bowlby suggested that children who do not form a primary attachment within the sensitive period would be unable to recover. However, this is clearly not true of all children exposed to institutional care. Some children are not affected as much as others, while others appear to have physical and mental functioning in line with control groups that were not orphans. This is a limitation because it suggests that the developmental outcomes observed in the Romanian orphans cannot be solely attributed to the lack of primary attachments. The presence of individual differences implies that some children may possess resilience or other protective factors that enable them to cope better with the challenges of institutional care. This variability challenges Bowlby's assertion and highlights the complexity of child development, indicating that a one-size-fits-all approach may not be applicable in understanding the effects of institutionalization. A limitation of research into Romanian orphan studies and the effects of institutionalization is that the results may be affected by confounding variables and lacks population validity. The quality of care within these institutions was remarkably poor, with children being deprived of more than just emotionally, receiving very little intellectual stimulation or comfort. Therefore, it cannot be concluded that all of the negative effects are solely due to emotional deprivation. Studies were quasi or natural experiments, investigators had no control over the extraneous variables, and we cannot draw a causal conclusion about the effects of institutionalization. Children lacked any intellectual stimulation, left all day in their cribs, potentially alone, or in combination with the emotional deprivation that's responsible for difficulty forming relationships and lower IQ scores. This is a limitation because it suggests that the negative developmental outcomes observed in the Romanian orphans may not be solely due to emotional deprivation, but rather a combination of factors, including the lack of intellectual stimulation and the overall poor quality of care in the institutions. This complexity makes it challenging to isolate the specific impact of emotional deprivation on the children's ability to form relationships and their cognitive development. As a result, the conclusions drawn from these studies may lack population validity, as they do not account for the various confounding variables present in the institutional environment. Thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more content like this. Bye.